JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, the host of Talking Book Show on Web Talk Radio, and today I would like to welcome back Linda Dooks from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom to talk about her second book, which is a historical fiction story, Land of Opportunity, Book 2. When I last interviewed Linda last year about her first book, Land of Opportunity, we had a right giggle putting the interview together. And I must say, we've certainly had our entertaining moments putting this podcast interview together, everybody. We really have. Linda has now 2 books out in the series, with the third coming along. Very, very nicely, everybody. And if I'm lucky, she might give me another interview. Hopefully, coming out later this year. If I give her a push, she might get it out earlier. Now, the one thing I want to point out is that you have to read the books in sequence, because you won't understand what's going on in this new book of hers. So you have to read Land of Opportunity first, then read Land of Opportunity Book 2, because that's the way she's written the series. They are not standalones. So what's in this book? Well, let's invite Linda to come and join me again to talk about herself and her work, and hopefully the both of us will manage to hold ourselves together without falling apart, having fits of giggles. It's going to be hard, but that's what we are about. Anyway, enough of my waffling. Linda, come and join me.
Hello, John. Thank you for inviting me again, and I'm sure we'll get lots of giggles in.
Oh, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. So, Linda, before we venture into this latest book of yours, The Land of Opportunity Book 2, could you just remind the audience as to who you are and just give us a little hint, as to what this book, this second book in the series, is about?
Well, I'm Linda Dooks, author, of course, of Land of Opportunity. Book 2 is as you were saying, is the continuation of Book 1, and it picks up in 1912. The first book finished in the mountains where they were all having a rest, and they have a letter from Harry Selfridge inviting them to England to the official opening of Selfridges. And Rose tells the family that she is expecting again, and that the room on the boat needs to have room for a cot. And that's where it finishes. So this second book starts in April 1912.
Very good. So shall we have a look at this book then?
Lovely.
Okay. Now, everybody, there are 44 chapters, and if you think we're going to dip our toes into all 44 chapters, I'm sorry to disappoint, we're not, because we'll be here forever and a day. And if you want to know more about what's in both of the books, but mainly this one, then you can go to Linda's webpage, www.lindadooks.com, and have a look and find out more about it there and her books. Now, like we did with her last interview, as I said, we're not going to go in all the chapters because that's not the whole idea of this interview. The idea is to whet your appetite, give you a little teaser as to what this latest book of hers is all about. But we have compiled a few chapters to look at, enough to give you an inkling as to what the flavour of this book is about. So we will chat about a couple of those chapters just to give you a flavour. Now, this book is a little shorter than the first book, everybody, and Linda's done that deliberately because there is a third book coming out very shortly, and that one will be a bigger book. So this one is kind of is the book in the middle. This is the book that she's leading up to the third book, because the whole series you have to read in sequence. She's very cleverly done this. So let's open this book and let's find out what Linda is talking about in this second book of the series. So, Linda, let's head straight off to the first 2 chapters in the book. Now, you set the scene here in the Blackwood household, New York, 1912. And you're talking about the sinking of the Titanic. The unthinkable has happened. Plus the Carpathia Moors at Pier 54. The survivors of the Titanic disembarking in New York. Thomas and Nathan consider the impact on their department store Macy's, because Thomas is one of the owners of Macy's. A very wealthy, wealthy man. The Blackwoods are very wealthy. Rose sure did pick a good one here. Plus Rose and Veronica's attempts to console those who have lost everything off the Titanic. So, Linda, this is a very powerful opening again. Where are you steering the reader here? Where are you taking us with this opening gambit of these two chapters?
Well, obviously starting in April 1912, I felt that it wasn't something that we could just skip over, because it was a very important time, a very sad time, and I wanted the readers, without going into too much detail, but I felt the readers ought to know what happened, how it came about, and how it would affect Rose and Thomas and the family. I also wanted to tell the history of a little bit of Isidor Strauss and his wife Ida, who were lost on the Titanic. And Isidor Strauss was at the time the owner of Macy's, and his son Nathan, that with Thomas, were down at the docks. No one had an idea, no one knew who had survived until the survivors arrived at Pier 54. They had to wait for them. I wanted it to come across as the vulgarity of the press and how they hounded the survivors, going out on little ships and following the boat in and actually throwing money up to the survivors so that they could get stories from them. It was really a terrible time. Anything to try and get a report from them. And I wanted the readers to know what that was like, and how the moment that they stepped off the boat was a very monumental moment, because the people that were on the docks were very quiet. It was utter silence. You could have heard a pin drop, and then all of a sudden, as the survivors stepped off onto the plank, there was this huge cacophony of noise, and everybody surged forward, and these poor survivors turned around and wanted to go back on board ship. They didn't want to come off, they couldn't cope with it. So I hope that I've brought that across, without it being too upsetting for everyone. But it was a time when this happened. So I hope that makes sense. And obviously how Rose, being a member of the ladies' charity, and Veronica, they spent many hours helping the survivors off the ship, but otherwise they would have stepped off and there'd have been nobody there for them, because a lot of them, their families weren't there, because some had come from Ireland, so they hadn't got anyone to greet them. Some, of course, had come from England and Ireland that had families in America, so they got support. But there were many hundreds that didn't have support, and the ladies were there. Veronica and Rose and the other ladies were there to help these survivors. And it was a very traumatic time. And although I know I started chapter 1 quite light, because the children were happy and they were running around the house and they were getting their trunks packed and everything. It was the shock of the next morning when Thomas went into work. And you'll find that while researching, I was quite surprised to find that the first shouts of the sinking of the Titanic was that everyone had survived, because of course word, was just coming through the wireless and what have you. So it took another few hours, really, the following morning, before they suddenly realised that many lives were lost. And I was quite shocked when I read that, because it's one of those things that unless you do research, you don't know that these things have happened. So I hope that although it was a terrible event, that the readers find it interesting. And yes, it is quite a sad opening of my book 2.
It is, but it's very powerful and it's very well done.
Thank
And,
you.
it's the character Rose here, because she is the main protagonist, and Veronica, who's consoled the passengers coming off the boat, having
Yes.
gone through such traumatic time and the sinking of the Titanic. So this is the area, this is the scene, this is the background to this second book of Linda's. So, Linda, now let's jump forward a couple of chapters to chapters 8 and 9. And here we find Rose and Veronica heading off in a landau to Briarcliff Farm. There's an invite to one of Charlie Chaplin's shows at the Majestic Theatre in Manhattan. And if you've ever been in Manhattan, the Majestic Theatre is absolutely wonderful. And you've got Janet's demise. You've got Millie's brother Kenny. You've got Ellis Island. Now, Linda and I have a little joke about Ellis Island, but we'll keep that to ourselves. I told you we
Yes.
would fall apart here.
Yes, don't tell. Please don't
We
tell.
won't tell. Linda has her own spelling of island. No comment. And so we're in an early November day. We've got the RMS Caronia. So Linda, where is the storyline going here?
Well, I want obviously to Bycliffe Farm. My Those that have read book one will know about Bycliffe Farm, and it's one of those places where a lot of the migrants managed to find work through the charity ladies. They were registered with the charity, and the ladies took them. It was for those that were in farming could go over, and they always popped over just occasionally just to make sure that everything was all right. And in this chapter, I wanted the readers to know that not everything runs smoothly. No matter what the charity ladies do and try, things don't always fall into plan. And poor Janet, although they took her there, she never settled. And there is a reason why she didn't settle. And it's a very sad reason. And sadly, she feels that she just can't survive. She can't live. And that's one of the reasons why the owners of Brightcliff Farm had written to Rose and the charity ladies to ask them to go because they were very concerned. But by the time they'd got there, it was too late. I won't go into details because obviously they'll read it. So chapters 8 and 9 really is another sort of sad couple of chapters in a way, but it's part of life. It's what the migrants went through. And as I say, no matter how hard these charity ladies did, it didn't always work out for the best. And also they'll have heard about the little boy that went, and he loved machinery, he adored machinery, but he couldn't stay away from it. So they will come across as to why she lost her little brother, much as they kept telling him to get away, behave, you hurt yourself. So they will read, yes, as to what happened there. And here, of course, I've introduced two new characters, Kathleen O'Malley and her brother Spike O'Malley, who is wheelchair bound, but he's not a nice man.
He's not nice. He's not a nice character, everybody. Sean O'Malley's not a
No,
nice character.
no, I felt just because he was in a wheelchair does not mean to say he has to be goody-goody. And as time goes on, they will realise that he's a man to be reckoned with. Yes. And they arrive, and obviously I wanted to try and get across those that are in wheelchairs, even in those days, because I know it happens today, that when people speak to them, they speak to the person that's pushing them. They don't exist. And so I hope I brought that across. And Spike O'Malley gets quite cross about this. And so and the gentleman's asking them at the immigration centre, well, can you do anything? Is he capable? And he said to him, well, if you come a bit closer, I'll show you how capable I am. Well, the readers will discover what happens.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yes. And it's very true. I'm glad to say that it doesn't happen quite so much these days. I think the public has been finally educated.
Yes,
Numerous times, I've supported people with learning disability who use a wheelchair, and they ask you, the person who's pushing the chair, how is so and so? Well,
yes.
no, you ask the person,
You ask the
not
person.
yeah,
Yes,
because they're
yes.
quite capable of answering for themselves. It's just that the fact they're having to use a wheelchair. So I'm glad that's how you've categorized the character Sean there, but the rest of his characteristics is nasty, nasty, nasty.
Well, I'm sure he won't mind me telling you that Sean actually is a young man that goes to the writers group that I attend, and he
Mm.
wanted to be part of my story.
But he's not nasty. He's very, very nice.
Oh, he's a lovely young chap. He really is. He's so sweet. And he's been going to the gym regularly to build up the muscles in his arms because he's my bodyguard when I go to my book signings and things like
Oh,
that.
she's so famous. Listen to her now.
Oh,
She's so
I know.
famous. I told you we'd struggle with this interview, but there you go. Anyway,
And
let's take the reader to the next part of the book, chapters 16 and 17. Let's march on here. And now we have a body.
I
We've got
wonder
a
how many.
conversation between Eli and Mallet. We've got Poughkeepsie Bridge, a brothel. Uh-oh. Kathleen and Sean. Here we go. And we've got a little black book, everybody, which Kathleen keeps. Who visits this brothel? Oh, she's got their names. And we've got the New Brighton Boys gang. Sorry, boxing club, not gang, boxing club. Now, this is a seedier, darker side to your plot, which you are imploding on the reader here, Linda. The plot definitely thickens. Spill the beans as to where you're taking us here.
Well, obviously, time has moved on. I have tried to put some lighter chapters in before we got to here, but but obviously, this is where Kathleen O'Malley and Sean have set up their high-end brothel. Um, and obviously, they get some very important people there. Um, now, there is a reason why Kathleen O'Malley has come to New York, and that's to do with Battle Axe Annie. There is a reason. And she's determined to take the very young girls that Battle Axe Annie takes in. They're called the Gopher Girls. And obviously they're there for a reason. But um, but she steals them from Battle Axe Annie. But unfortunately, their young lives are lost through the hands of Sean Spike O'Malley. There is a reason for that. And Kathleen begins to realise that things are getting out of hand. And she's beginning to worry that it'll catch up with her. Time will tell.
Oh, time will definitely tell everybody.
Yes. Now, Eli, who is Paul Kelly's second in command, he goes through Poughkeepsie Bridge, which takes them along the Hudson. And of course, one morning he's going along and he finds the bodies of two young girls there. And they're very young girls. In fact, they're still only probably 15 or 16. They're very young. And it troubles him. Although he's a gangster himself, they don't kill children and they don't kill young women. And it becomes quite worrying. And so he decides that this has got to be looked into, and obviously it leads to quite a meeting.
It does. And, the theme continues throughout the next few chapters.
It does, yes.
And in particular, around the chapters of 23 and 24, which I found very gripping because we've got gang warfare fights here. And here
Yes.
we've got Catherine back. Well, she has been back throughout the book, everybody, but she's pretty much focused on this chapter, around this part of the book. And she's a news reporter. And she goes out with her cameraman, Gus. to find out what, really is the story that's going on around Stanton Street, around, Kathleen's brothel and all that's happening with all these bodies that keep reappearing. Um, so it's a fascinating story. It's hard punching. So this book really is, Linda's book is a bit of romance, it's thriller, it's adventure, it's history, it's dark, it's deep, and there are criminal undergrounds tones to her story. So Kathleen O'Malley, well, she calls it the high-end brothel, and with her brother, I'm going to call Nasty Sean because he's not a nice character. And Eli, now, so she's very impatient and she's been told to wait for Eli, who is going to be her bodyguard when she goes down there, but she doesn't. She takes Gus and things do not go according to plan. So we've got a shootout, we've got hospital visits, we've got bodyguards, we've got impatient Catherine. It's very, very gripping, I have to say. So enlighten the reader, the audience here, as to what you are exposing.
Well, as you say, I am exposing the very dark underworld of this area. Now, she's actually called Catrian. I know you called her Catherine, but she's actually called Catrian. Yeah. And at the time when I was researching, I came across the massive floods that hit New York, and it was literally at this time. And it flooded the whole, well, most of New York itself and the streets, even including Macy's. They had to move everything up to the first floor. So that caused a lot of problems. Obviously, for those that lived in the cellars and the lower tenement buildings, they were forced out because they had to sleep on the stairs further up and all this sort of thing. And it was at this time when a lot of young girls, their young bodies had been found over a period, and it was getting out of hand. And as you say, Catherine in the New York Press Office decides it's time to look into it, because she'd been at home the night before and chatting to Veronica, and they'd been talking about it, and so Catherine decided that I'll look into it. And of course, her mother had told her, "Will you be careful? Don't do anything silly." But Catherine's impulsive. She's a reporter, and they're impulsive people, aren't they? So she decides to take Gus. Now, at first, she goes to Paul Kelly for help and advice. Well, his advice is leave well alone. You're not to go anywhere near. It's too dangerous. Leave well alone. So she more or less infers, just because I'm a woman, you think I can't report on this? Well, I'm going. So Paul Kelly obviously says, well, you go, but you take Eli with you, which rather sort of rankles her a little bit. Anyway, they leave and she gets into the carriage. But unbeknownst to Paul Kelly, Eli already has something ongoing. And he has a meeting. And he says to Catrian, wait for me. I will be back shortly, but I have got to go to this meeting. And he disappears. And of course, it takes a lot longer. She gets fed up of waiting and she decides to set off on her own. And they stop on the corner of the street and they stop some of these young girls, but of course they won't speak to them. They're too frightened to speak to them. And they go back to the Stanton Street, and of course Spike O'Malley's waiting for them because he's seen them. He's seen Catrian and Gus on the corner of the street and wonder what's happening. And of course, he forces them to tell him what's happened. By this time, Catrian has arrived at Stanton Street, and she boldly walks up and she knocks on the door, which is the worst thing she could have done. And of course, Spike O'Malley opens the door and more or less tells them where to go. And of course, Catrian tries to tell him that she's there to do a report on high-end brothels. And she thought that perhaps Kathleen O'Malley would like to talk to them about it so that they could explain to the public that, these high-end brothels are not too bad a place. Well, of course, he's not falling for that. And Gus manages to pull her away, and because he then, of course, produces his gun, which he carries in the pocket of his wheelchair. And of course, Gus pulls her away, and they manage to get across the street. And of course, there's a shot, and Catriona goes down. And just at that moment, Eli comes round the corner, and of course he sees total chaos in front of him, and it's pouring with rain. The rainwater is turning red in the gutters. He rushes over to help, and he scoops her up, thinking that she's dead, and takes her to the carriage. And of course, poor Gus is following, and of course another shot rings out, and of course it hits him in the leg. Now, do they survive?
Wait and see, everyone.
You'll have to read on to find out. But it's impulsiveness that gets her into this danger. Yes.
And of course, this little black book that
Oh.
Catherine keeps is very, very, very significant.
Oh,
Because
very
in those
much.
days, if you've got the names, so if anybody's going to close you down or bring you trouble, well,
Yes.
you've got this list of names of the high society people who've paid a little visit, and you can bribe them with that. That's how she survives,
Yeah.
isn't
And
it?
of course, obviously, the police are involved.
Oh, yes.
Perhaps the chief of police likes to visit, and his name goes in the little black book.
He's in the little black book.
Oh,
He's
yes.
not daft. She's not daft. Anyway, Linda, let's march on and let's go to the chapters around 28, 29. Now, we've got afternoon tea at the Quaker Pensington house. And this is far from a genteel, cosy chat. And sips of tea. Stella has a story to tell. Boy, does she have a story to tell. Rose's day is turning out not to be as how she thought it was going to be. In fact, it's quite challenging. And then we've got Una, another character. Very interesting character, and she's in stark contrast to Stella. So here are more characters, everybody. The plot thickens. Christmas at Macy's department store and at the Blackwood household. I felt when I was looking at these chapters that there's a bit of a softer approach to your storyline here. And I think you're just giving the reader a little bit of a rest before you take them back on the normal pace of this book as you take them towards the finishing line. Am I right?
You're right. Yes. Well,
So
I
what's
felt I
cracking off
should.
here?
I thought I should. I mean, poor readers, things have been a bit sort of, oh, goodness me. So I thought maybe they needed to make a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and just relax a little bit. Yes, I lead them into a false sense of security. Well, Wenham Village actually is a place that still exists, and America turned it into a museum. But back in 1912, 1913, this place was opened up by ladies that had come from Ireland and all the other areas into Ellis Island and had set up in this little village. They built little houses, and they set up where they made homemade jams and cakes, and they knit and they crochet, and they got in touch with the charitable organisation and said they had room to take mothers that were on their own, maybe with a little one. So this mother arrived, and they decided to take her to the Wenham Village tea room, and she's quite sort of overawed that this kindness has been shown to her. She lost her husband at the docks. That's sort of in a few chapters beforehand. Yes, after she arrived, things happened, and sadly she lost her husband and her other child, and so it just left her and the baby. And they go to Ellis Island. They go to Wenham Village. She's not going to stay, so she says, because she feels she needs to go back home to Ireland to her to her parents and her sister. So she'll just stay until the boat goes back. Now, does she go home or does she stay? Time will tell. Now, the other thing also, once Rose and Veronica, as I've said before, not everything goes smoothly. No matter how hard these charity ladies work and hope that they get people settled into jobs, then they're sometimes not always the right job. But that's because some of these migrants, they're so grateful to be looked after and to have work found for them that they just take it. They just go, yes, lovely, thank you very much. Well, when they get back to Pennington House, there's quite an almighty row going on. And some of the ladies have come back from the teddy bear factory. And the one lady says, if I stick one more teddy bear stuffed leg on, I shall throw myself into the Hudson. And she actually eventually describes that she's actually a very intelligent woman and she worked for the bank in Ireland and she wants more to her life than just sticking a leg on a stuffed teddy. And of course, Rose and Veronica said, well, why didn't you tell us this? And that's when she says, well, I was just so grateful to have a job. And I just said, thank you very much. But I've got to the point where I need help. And so Rose and Veronica, they do actually find her the right job for her over time, well, quite soon actually, and she is immensely grateful to them. Obviously, there was a reason why she got on the boat to come to Ireland, and she'd left this husband behind. There is a reason for that.
There is a reason for that, everybody.
There is, yes. I won't give it away, but there is, yes. And she was just grateful to get away from everything. But of course, not to stuff legs on teddies.
No. She was a woman who got her own career in mind.
She did, yes. So I'm sure as you read on, you'll find how things work out for her. Yes.
For the time being, we'll keep that quiet.
Yes.
Now, it's fascinating, isn't it, Linda, that a lot of the young people who got off the boats, they were kids and they were on their own. And this is what Rose and Veronica were doing. They were supporting them because they came on their own.
Yes. It was terrible. They sometimes they had the cattle ships would come in and they would get the children to help them load the cattle on. But then the parents would hide the children in amongst the cattle. And the parents would leave and leave the children. And of course, it wasn't till they set sail that probably the sailors and those on the boat found these children because, of course, they were hungry, they were cold, they were crying, and they took them under their wings. Very sadly, some of these children didn't survive the crossing, which was very sad. But I won't go too far into that because actually I explained that more in book 3. So I'm dashing ahead a little bit. I must stop myself.
Now, don't you dare. Book 3 is coming out later.
I know. I must stop myself.
Let's concentrate on book 2 and let's head off to chapters 34 and 35.
I'm just stopping you there, John. I did, of course, bring in the quiz. I'm sorry, yes. I bought in Christmas. And the time because this was the 1913 was the first Macy's department Christmas show. And they decorated the windows and they opened it up and they had a Santa's grotto and all that sort of thing. So I felt I needed to put that in because it just lightened everything a little bit. And it was, with researching, I came across that and I thought, oh, isn't that lovely? Yes, we must have that.
I forgot about that bit there in the question. Yes, she reminded me. Yes. And of course, that's been, Macy's, since they first did that, they do it every year. And the Macy's Christmas, well, nowadays it's a lot earlier than December.
It is, yes.
It's a lot earlier than the week before Christmas.
Week before Christmas, then.
Yeah.
Yes. And
so, Linda, let's go to chapters 34 and 35. And we've got the Blackwood family, a trip to England. First class on the RMS Aquitania. all paid for by the Selfridge family in London. We've got a spat at Paul Kelly's residence, Jackson's very misjudged off-the-cuff remark. Would you care to embellish, put some flesh on the bones as to what's happening in these pages?
Well, there's a reason why we have Jackson. Maybe not quite give it away as to why Eli is not with Paul Kelly anymore. And Jackson sort of works his way in and thinks he's going to be second in command. I've also introduced the Italian, the Camorra family, which is an underworld syndicate, and they have moved into New York. And Jackson thinks that he's the big knob now, and he's moved in, but things don't go well. Paul Kelly doesn't like him. He doesn't trust him. And as I say, it doesn't go well for Jackson at all. Jackson, while he's there, as the readers will know, in the first book, we sadly lost Agnes. And there's a photograph of Agnes. And he makes a comment about Agnes. Well, it was, you don't do that, because, you know, it may be 7 years since Agnes has died, but he's still very sure in his heart, he still misses her. He adored Agnes, and he misses her dreadfully. And it was the wrong thing to do. And unfortunately, Jackson, well, it doesn't bode well for him at all. Now, yes, Rose and her family have set off for England. She's returning home, as we say, through Harry Selfridge has sent them tickets. Catrianne has also joined them because she's been invited to the Sun newspaper at London. Isabel, their daughter, has joined them because the Red Cross nursing home in London, they're doing like a workover page, and so she's gone. They've invited her to go and work there. I explain the Aquitania as they're sailing over. And Tobias, of course, he's one that likes his leaflets, and he's reading it all out to them, you know, as boys do. And they have a lovely trip over. And they arrive at Southampton, and they meet up with Harry Selfridge. And Rose is, as I say, back on English soil. What will happen? Well, will things pan out for her and her family? Does she decide that she wants to go back to North Yorkshire? Does she want to show her family where she used to live? Time will tell. Yes.
Time will definitely tell everybody.
Yes.
And I suspect that's coming up in another book. We're not
Yes.
going there. So, Linda, the final chapter that we're going to explore is chapter 35. And, you know, here the Blackwoods have arrived in the UK. You tell us what's cracking off here.
Well, they have, as I say, they have arrived. It's obviously, the children are all very excited. Harry Selfridge picks them up and takes them back to his home. So they meet up with the Selfridge family. There's lots of things obviously will happen. They get Rose and Veronica get involved with the suffragettes. They get slightly more involved with the suffragettes than they had envisioned, and things get slightly out of hand, but they quite enjoy themselves. They go to a suffragette meeting. I introduce Emily Pankhurst. Now, although it's a lot of research, I've always said that although these people existed and these times happened, I use them loosely, because Emily Pankhurst was still in prison at the time, but she actually was released the day after the meeting, but I've just moved it forward a day, and I've got her that she actually, yes, that she actually appears at the meeting, and she gives her speech. And surprisingly enough, there were several men there, and they were actually there to back up the women. They thought the women were doing right, and they should have the rights to vote. But of course, behind them were those that thought, you should be at home, you should be behind the sink. And of course, as the meeting comes to an end, uproar envelops. And of course, Rose and Veronica and the rest of the girls attempt to get away. And so it's quite an exciting moment. And they eventually get back to Harry Selfridge. And of course, Harry's wife she's very English in her way. She's very demure. She thinks that their behaviour is really quite shocking. But Rose actually brings her out of her shell. And at the end, she has enjoyed her time with Rose, and she realises that actually there is another side to life than just being the housewife and running the house and what have you. So I thought, well, that's quite neat. Yes.
It has. And so I hope everybody you can get an understanding how that this book has got many twists and turns. It's historical theatre. There's a bit of romance in it. There's the darker sides. There's the gangsters. There's the warfare. There's the history of the Titanic, the boats, and the history of the Ellis Island, and the period of New York and society back in around about 1912, and also later on back in London, around the suffragettes and Emily Pankhurst. It's a fascinating book. There's lots in it. And you'll see that although it's a slightly shorter book than book one, there's so much packed into it. So, Linda, what's coming up in book three, and when is book three coming out?
Well, I like the way you said it might come out later this year. Please remember, I've got to write it, although
Oh,
I am on with it at the moment. Book three, we're into 1914, and it is the start of World War One, and that's where book three will start. Woodrow Wilson is president in America at that time, and he calls for neutrality in America. And Gus and Catriane, they're at the newspaper office, and they're reading that. And of course, it's how it will affect Rose and her family. Lucas, of course, is in the Navy, and he's already gone off on the Cassin, which is a destroyer, and that's in the South Pacific at the moment, but they're doing training and all that sort of thing. So yes, it obviously pulls the family in. I don't want the readers to think that book three is about the First World War. It isn't, but it is. It's in the background. So other things obviously are happening at that time. Things are still happening in America. Ellis Island is affected because of the World War One being called. So work there is slower, but the ladies have other things to do and other people to look after. So it takes it in a slightly different path. Although having said that, I've read one or two chapters at the writers' group, and they've all told me, this is a bit dark, Linda. And I thought, oh dear, I've started off dark again.
so Linda, who do you see as your market? Who do you want to see reading your books, and where can they get them from?
Well, I suppose it's obviously it's for those that enjoy historical history, and love story. It's a love story to a point. and the history that I've involved within my book, because there are fascinating points in there. Although, as I say, although they're in there, I have used them loosely. They're not exact to time, because I'm quite sure some readers go, well, actually, that happened on such a day. So I do like to sort of stress, yes, it happened in that period of time. So yes, it's for those people. I have had several gentlemen that have read book one, and have driven me mad for book two, and they've just received them, and I think they've just sat down and hidden themselves in a corner and have set off. So it is all generations. It's not just the older generation. I have some young people that have read the book. I have a young lady that's absolutely enthralled with the books. She loves them, and she even took book one on a cruise with her so she could sit on her balcony and read. And she sent me a photograph, and that was lovely to see. Um, so the books are available from Blossom Spring Publishers, Amazon, Goodread, Barnes and Noble. So you may, and of course libraries, obviously it will be going into the libraries. So yes, they are your main people.
And your webpage?
Oh yes, of course. I always forget about my webpage.
I
Not
don't.
being not being very techie minded, I forget about my webpage. And yes, Alex, bless him, that has done my webpage. He's just put book two on, so it is on there now. Yes.
Hooray!
Hooray! And I've just been brave enough to go onto TikTok. I don't.
Ooh.
My publisher said to me, "Aren't you on TikTok yet, Linda?" And my reply was, "Pardon?"
She is now, and she's got thousands of followers, everybody.
I know, I'm
So,
amazed.
as you can see, this is a very, very exciting book. And I certainly hope that book three is coming out this year. I'll be chipping her along, don't worry. She will have it out this year. And while we're sitting here interviewing her, her husband Pete is sitting beside her. You can't see him, he's staying out the interview. And you might have noticed that Linda's been giggling, and you've heard some giggling in the background, is because when she's been talking, I've been sitting here pulling face at her going, really? Oh, no, don't go there. Anyway, I'd just like to say to Linda, thank you ever so much for coming on the show again. It's been a huge privilege to look at her second book, and I hope I get the third book to interview her as well. So, thank you very much, Linda, for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely to see you again, and most definitely we shall meet again for my third book.
I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening wherever you're in the world. Until next time, stay safe.